All right, let's dive right in. This is a Code Ninja security advisory, and we are currently operating under an active exploitation alert. So if you manage any kind of WordPress infrastructure, I need you to listen closely. We're tracking a highly critical vulnerability chain known as WP2 shell. My primary objective with this explainer is to force rapid mitigation across all of your defensive perimeters. Over the next few minutes, we're going to break down exactly how this exploit works under the hood, why it's so incredibly devastating, and most importantly, the immediate protocol you absolutely must follow to secure your environments. Let's get to work. To really grasp the severity of this threat, we have to look at the timeline. It perfectly illustrates the sheer, terrifying speed of modern exploit weaponization. On July 17th, we got the 0-hour disclosure alongside the core patch release from the WordPress security team, but look at what happens immediately after. The window for defenders literally slammed shut in under 6 hours. By July 18th, a fully functional proof of concept was already published, and threat actors instantly kicked off mass, automated scanning across the entire IPv4 address space. Boom, just like that. By the 19th, active incident response engagements were happening everywhere, which forced rapid tool deployment from teams like Cybersecurity on the 20th. So today, we're issuing mandatory directives. Why? Because this isn't some theoretical whiteboard threat, it is a live, automated siege on the perimeter. Now, before we dissect the actual anatomy of this exploit, I need to initiate a quick comms check. Are you receiving this intel? Look, in our line of work, real-time intelligence is a fundamental security necessity, not an optional perk. I need you to subscribe to @cybertech79 right now and turn those notifications on so you don't miss these critical alerts when they drop. And please, hit like on this brief as your formal acknowledgement of receipt. We have to ensure this mitigation protocol reaches every single defender out there. Acknowledged? Good. Let's look at the blast radius. 9.8. That is the CVSS score for this vulnerability chain, and frankly, it earns every single decimal point. To put that into perspective, a 9.8 basically means your server is handing over the keys to the kingdom to anyone who asks, with absolutely zero questions asked. What's absolutely crucial to understand here is the context behind that number. This is an unauthenticated remote code execution flaw. That means zero authentication required, zero third-party plugins required. It successfully targets default, out-of-the-box WordPress installations. So the blast radius here, it's practically limitless. Any stock install exposed to the internet right now is a viable target. Okay, so let's break down exactly who is at risk based on your specific version branch. WP2 shell is actually a chain of two distinct CVEs working together. If you're sitting on version 6.8.0 through 6.8.5, you're vulnerable to the SQL injection. But, and this is a big but, the route confusion bug isn't present there, meaning attackers still need to be authenticated to actually reach it. However, if you're running the 6.9 or 7.0 branches, specifically anything up to 6.9.4 or 7.0.1, both vulnerabilities are present. This right here is the danger zone. This is where those two bugs perfectly combine to grant full, unauthenticated remote code execution. Let's isolate the root causes, starting with the gateway bug, CVE 2026-63030. This is a REST batch API route confusion bug. See, WordPress has this perfectly legitimate batch endpoint, /wpjson/batch/v1, that processes multiple subrequests at the same time. Internally, it relies on two parallel arrays. One validates permissions, the other executes the request. But there is a fatal flaw here. If a subrequest throws an error during validation, you get an array desynchronization error. The arrays physically shift out of alignment. Suddenly, your next request executes, but WordPress is checking the permissions of the previous request. It's literally like a bouncer checking the ID of the guy in front of you, but then waving you through into the VIP lounge. It effectively drops all authentication checks, allowing an attacker to hit protected endpoints under a completely public permission context. And that gateway, it opens the door straight to the weapon itself, CVE 2026-6137. This is a critical SQL injection in the WP query class, specifically living inside the author_not_in parameter. The core issue here is a classic, honestly painfully simple PHP type juggling flaw. The system is expecting an array of user IDs, and it tries to sanitize them using the absint function. But if an attacker just applies a string instead of an array, the type check silently fails. The array sanitization is bypassed entirely, and that raw attacker-controlled string is dropped directly into the SQL where clause. Now, on its own, reaching this parameter usually requires an admin session. But thanks to that route confusion gateway we just talked about, it's now completely exposed to the open internet. So how are threat actors actually stringing this all together in the wild? Let's walk through the exact tactical protocol of the WP2 shell weaponization chain. Step 1. The attacker fires off a nested batch request to trigger that route confusion, entirely bypassing authentication for the protected post's endpoint. Step 2. Now that they're unauthenticated but inside, they hit that author_not in parameter and execute a union-based SQL injection. They use this to inject forged database rows, specifically manipulating the customize_change set and the OMB cache. Step 3. WordPress's own internal customizer preview mechanism processes those forged rows, which effectively elevates the attacker's context to a site administrator. From there, game over. They spawn a rogue admin account and drop a self-destructing PHP web shell. And the craziest part? All of this happens in one single automated HTTP request. Now hold on, there is one crucial environmental nuance you need to be aware of here: cache dependency. If your WordPress infrastructure happens to utilize a persistent external object cache, something like Redis or memcached, it actually disrupts that oembed transient write path the attacker needs for step 3. So it neutralizes the specific remote code execution path. But do not for a second let this give you a false sense of security. The underlying SQL injection primitive is still there, and it remains highly dangerous. An attacker can still read your database, they can potentially extract password hashes, you are absolutely still vulnerable. And this right here is exactly why incident response for WP2Shell is an absolute nightmare for unprepared teams. Standard web access logs, your Nginx or Apache logs, are essentially blind to this evasion tactic. Because the entire exploit rides inside nested post bodies, you simply won't see the SQL injection in your logs. If you're relying solely on standard logging, you are flying completely blind. Therefore, you must pivot directly away from logs and into database reality. Defenders have to assume breach right now and start hunting for forensic database artifacts. You need to be actively looking for newly spawned rogue admins. We're seeing threat actors use addresses like @wp2shell.invalid, and you need to be hunting for injected transients and forged customizer rows. So what's the definitive mitigation protocol? Listen up, these are your mandatory defense directives. First, obviously, there's no substitute for the core patch. You must update immediately to 6.9.5, 7.02, or 6.8.6, depending on which branch you're on. If you physically cannot catch instantly, you must temporarily block the /wp-json/batch/v1 routes at the web server level using your WAF or Nginx rules. Next, audit your WP_users table immediately for any unauthorized administrator accounts. I highly recommend running iSecurity's free compromise scanner plugin to check for those forensic database artifacts we just mentioned. Finally, and this is absolutely crucial, if your servers were exposed during that 0-hour window, patching alone does not remove the attacker's foothold. They might already be in. You must force global password resets and rotate your API keys. I want to pause here for just a second to address the philosophy behind this explainer. You might be wondering, why do we dissect these exploits so publicly? Well, because users need to know exactly what they're up against to protect their systems, and forced updates simply do not reliably reach sites that have disabled auto-updates. Now, WordPress absolutely did the right thing by forcing automatic updates where they could, but as security professionals practicing coordinated vulnerability disclosure, we know that forced updates aren't a silver bullet. Keeping quiet, silence only benefits the threat actors who are already actively scanning your perimeter. We dissect the threat like this, so you can hunt for it, truly understand it, and eradicate it from your networks for good. The WP2 shell chain is a masterclass in exploiting complex system interactions, literally turning two highly conditional bugs into a devastating unauthenticated RCE. Please treat your unpatched instances as compromised until proven otherwise. Follow the directives, hunt through your database, and lock down your perimeter. Stay secure. And I'll leave you with this final critical thought. Have you audited your infrastructure today? Because if you haven't, I guarantee the threat actors already have.